Hello, I'm Rob Doherty and this is the FSTVS podcast, Executive Edition, supported by Liberi Consulting and hosted by Julian Scott, animation consultant for Film London. In this series we'll be chatting to the big hitters in the animation industry and discovering a little bit more about what they do, how they got there, their thoughts on the animation industry, and, I hope, get to meet the person behind that executive title. In today's episode, Julian is chatting with Kate O'Connor. Kate is a senior consultant in the creative industries, collaborating with private and public sector clients throughout the UK, Ireland and internationally. But she is probably better known, to the animation industry at least, as the founder and executive chair of Animation UK. Let's dive straight in and get some big picture views on the animation industry.
Kate, welcome to the FSTVS podcast. How are you? We're chatting at 10 a.m. on a Friday, but I assume you've already made an impact on something.
Oh, yes. Well, firstly, Julian, it's so nice to hear your voice and to have this chat. I love Liberi. I love FSTVS. I'm really looking forward to this. It'd be the highlight of my day, for sure. But yeah, what have I achieved so far? Well, I have been for my regular walk. I have eaten a very healthy breakfast. I always start my diet on a Friday, not on Monday. So there you go. I've done that.
Brilliant. I'm impressed. I've just got coffee. That's all I've managed to achieve this morning so far. Make myself a coffee.
Not too bad.
So listen, you work at a very senior level with animation, but I guess it could be said that you work behind the scenes. You've represented the animation sector at government level. You've successfully lobbied for increases and changes to the tax credit system. And you've formulated business, export and employment-related policies, all designed to bolster the industry's growth. And you're really passionate about it. I've heard you speak at numerous conferences. You really speak with passion about animation. And looking back to the start of your career, was animation part of your plan?
Well, do you know what? It wasn't. And this kind of work was definitely not consciously part of my plan either. Thank you for saying I work at a senior level, and thank you for saying I show passion, because I honestly feel it. I think that has to be a real thing, personally. But when I look back at my career, and I think about all the steps that led to this point, I think probably I should have predicted that I might end up in some sort of campaigning or lobbying or policy development role. I've worked in those fields for most of my working life, and I don't have a creative bone in my body, is what I like to say, but I so admire people who do. And I've always loved the animation sector. I've worked with lots of different sectors in the film and TV world, and animation, seriously, is the most fascinating. The brilliant combination of creativity and business, the fabulous people, the great output, and it's also very much a kind of Cinderella sector. People don't necessarily think about animation when they're thinking about film and TV, and they certainly haven't been representing animation that effectively in the past. When I say they, I mean other industry bodies. So although my role is slightly behind the scenes, I'm fronting a sector that I truly love and respect and admire, and trying to make the issues that surround the animation business more meaningful and impactful for the people who can change things, e.g. the government and some organisations like the BFI or the BFCE, or indeed Film London, not that it's needed with you, Julian, and, just put forward the case for animation all the time. That's my job, repetitively, forcefully, and delighted to hear you think passionately. That's what I love doing.
No, I absolutely do think you do it passionately, and I know for a fact that, back in 2011, 2012, whenever it was, before the animation tax credit came in, the industry was pretty much on its knees. And I'm just I can look at the figures from Film London because that's what I do. But since the tax credit came in and it's increase, and we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute about what's happening now. Yeah. I have seen the investment in animation in London go up, from to roughly 35 million to around 500 million pounds a year. It's the most phenomenal increase. But with that comes, a need for talent, a need for animators, a need for people who, work at the coalface. And there's a continual talk about what I call the perceived skills gap between, the training that the UK can offer and what the industry needs. Now, back in the day, you were the founder and executive director of Creative Skillset, which is now Screen Skills. You have non-exec roles at numerous UK universities, film schools, BFI, Screen Industries Research Advisory Group. Do you think that skills gap exists? Is it shrinking? And if it's not shrinking, why do you think it's not shrinking?
Actually, I do think it's shrinking, the skills gap. I do think you're right to call it a perceived skills gap as well, because it's really complex. And everyone tends to, naturally fall back on generalities about skills and talent when it's actually really complicated. Do we mean that there aren't enough people coming through to the industry? Does it mean we're not keeping the right people in the industry? Does it mean we're not got the right profile of people, i.e. a diverse profile working in the sector? There's so many different angles to this. But, the nature of the industry is cyclical. We tend to go through periods of really being busy for all sorts of reasons, and then periods where the industry is slightly flatter in terms of production spend and output, obviously influenced by things like tax relief, but also just the general global context. And therefore, the need for people and skills and that horrible clunky word pipeline of people and talent goes up and down. And I think at the moment we're in a more stable position. But I also think I've never been in a situation where there's so much effort that's going into skills, not just in animation, but across film and TV more generally. There's a task force and all the right people are around the right table talking about how we stop being boom or bust and then letting our workforce kind of follow that and start being more strategic about how we invest in people who are the lifeblood of the industry, how we properly think about that in good times as well as the bad. And that Screen Industries task force includes all the streamers and the broadcasters and the representative bodies. The animation industry, we know because we've just done some work, invests heavily in its people, and not just at entry level, but in terms of career progression. We can always do more. I think we've got great animation schools and courses. I think we've stopped, thank God, the bashing of universities and colleges for not producing the right people with the right skills, and talk much more about how we develop bridges into the industry, partnerships between industry and education. I think these are really good and positive steps forward. And we definitely need to look at the issue of investment and how we invest more in our people. But, things, Julian, like since the COVID lockdowns, the move towards more hybrid working practices means it's easier for people to work in the industry and not have to migrate to more expensive city living like London or whatever. It means that there's, with every, difficult development comes a serious upside. And I think although that's problematic for training and, in onboarding people, that it allows more access issues. So overall, I think we're not in the worst stage in terms of skills gaps and shortages. We are doing a lot. We're thinking about this an awful lot. And there's some really great people who are putting their minds to this, like Tom Box at Blue Zoo, who chairs the skills committee, and they're putting a huge amount of effort into looking at how we deal with this. I think that's paying dividends at the moment.
Well, that's really good to hear because, and you did mention when you were talking just then about the sort of the bashing of universities and academic institutions not producing talent or animators who are, if you like, fit to work. And there used to be this discussion about, the industry, well, I've heard this said on a couple of panels. I wouldn't say by whom, but studios saying, well, I don't have the time or the money to train people. So when they come to me with their animation degree, I expect them to be able to sit down at 9:30 on a Monday morning and just start work. You think that's disappearing?
I don't think it's disappeared entirely. Listen, I remember you organising a fantastic session called Bridging the Gap, and there were still those kind of discussions happening, right, in terms of, we're not getting oven-ready people out of our animation schools and colleges. I think that more recently, when I hear people talking about this on the panels, but also just in terms of committees and discussions, there's a lot more recognition that, one, we shouldn't expect that, and two, the industry has got to roll its sleeves up and do something about creating the bridges into work, internship, traineeships, giving information to the colleges and universities to make the courses more relevant. All of that stuff needs to happen, and I think is happening more. So I don't think it's completely gone away, but I think there's a much more partnership oriented conversation happening at the moment, which I find, because of all the years I've spent in this field, I find that really, really reassuring and actually very optimistic. But it's only part of the problem. The training has to go on when people are working. Their skills need to be continually developed. We need managers and supervisors and leaders as well. So it's not just about entry level, it's about the whole thing. And I think there's quite a lot of evidence that the industry are putting investment into senior level training as well. But that's probably still where the rub is. That's probably still where we've got some skills gaps and shortages that we need to address and tackle. But yeah, look, I don't want to sound too Pollyanna-ish about this. It's not all roses, but definitely the right ingredients are there. People are talking, thinking, strategizing, and planning, and recognizing that there's no one part of the industry jigsaw that takes the whole responsibility. It is educationalists and trainers and the industry and the policy and funding bodies who need to work together.
That's brilliant, because you mentioned that panel that we did a few years ago, and that was one of the things that I noticed in setting up for that there seemed to be sort of two sides to the equation, but they weren't talking. So the industry was saying, we're not getting, you made a very good phrase, oven-ready talent. But what the universities and other places were saying was, well, tell us what you need. We can't adapt immediately, but tell us what you need. Talk to us, and we'll do our level best to actually deliver what you need, because that's got to be in the best interest of the students as well.
100%. 100%. That talking needs to happen. But even more than that, there needs to be that collaboration in terms of opportunity for work experience and placements. I mean, some of the best European schools that everyone refers to are actually very different courses. They have built-in long-term work experience or placements with the industry, and we don't really have a culture of that in the UK in any subject area. And I think that would work really well. But, I think, as I say, we've got the right platform for the discussion and things have moved on. And because everyone has been responsible for organising for the conversation to happen, whether that was Film London or Manchester Animation Festival or discussions at, other various big conferences, I think that's really helped break down the blame game, as it were, for the skills crisis.
Excellent. That's good. Really, really, really good to hear. Moving on from that, and I hate to bring up the B word, Brexit. Obviously, animation's always been a really international business, and there can be no doubt that Brexit and the UK no longer being part of Creative Europe have impacted the industry. But, since all that happened, thanks to you and others' hard work, we have a new tax credit, the AVEC, which nets out, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think nets out at about 30% return. Very recently, a couple of months ago, we heard about the increased independent film tax credit, which encompasses animated features, which I think is going to net out at about 40%. Do you think that these increases and other funding opportunities like BFI's Global Screen Fund, which covers international distribution, co-production and business development, have compensated for that loss? Or do you think there's more work to do in that area?
Hell no, I do not think they have compensated for that loss. Look, firstly, on the tax relief, I want to say that Animation UK was built on the shoulders of some really great people who lobbied for the initial tax relief for animation that you referred to earlier, Julian. Principally Ollie Hyatt, but not only Ollie, who set up Animation UK as a lobbying organisation, got the first tax breaks relief system in place in 2012. It was a complete game changer. And that is something that when Animation UK was set up more formally, in 2016, 2017, it was the very first thing that we set out to do, was to increase the tax relief so we were more on a level playing field with our European competitors. And that was obviously at the same time as the dreaded B word. So I'm thrilled that we've got the new tax uplift for animation. I'm really, really pleased with the indie film tax relief for budget movies under 15 million budget, because I think that's a game changer for the UK. And it's fantastic because it puts us right up there with our international competitors. But we've always had a really strong heritage and relationship with our European partners. Europe animation is built on a kind of tapestry of co-production, often with European partners. Animation UK remains proudly a member of Animation in Europe, and our production companies work very closely with European co-production partners. But we don't come usually to the partnership with a great deal of funding, so we lack investment from the UK in content funding. And as well as the tax relief, we need that kind of funding, which has been declining from the UK PSBs over the last 15 years. Some peg that at 80% decline, so it's fairly substantial. And without that investment, we can't come to these co-production deals with our money, as well as our tax relief. That said, the Global Screen Fund that the BFI have introduced is a way to access some public funding. It just needs to be about 3 times as large. We've got a manifesto at Animation UK, and we're calling on the Global Screen Fund to be tripled in size, minimum double in the next iteration. And we need investment in development. We have very little investment in development in the UK compared to our competitors, and we need continued investment in shorts because that's the first rung on the ladder. So look, a lot of good has happened, and our role is to create the right business climate for the industry to grow. And I count some real wins over the last 5 years, but lack of investment is now a serious impediment, and we've got to tackle that. That's why Animation UK is working hard with other partners like the CMC and the CMF and broadcasters and others to look at ways in which we can seriously address the issues of lack of investment in animation and children's content generally. So there's more to be done.
Animation development, as we both know, is not cheap. And anybody, and there is no, at the moment, as far as I'm aware, any development investment from broadcasters. You have to self-fund it. If you're a larger studio and you've got resources, you might be able to put some sweat equity in it. But you've obviously got it's not like live action where you can write a script and that's that. Maybe have some casting ideas. In animation, obviously you need the script, but then you need character designs, and you may well need some kind of animation test or proof of concept or teaser or whatever it is. And these is tens of thousands of pounds worth of investment. And obviously the BFI's Young Audience Content Fund was brilliant at supplying that. Sadly, that's gone. Where do you think this funding might come from?
Yeah, I think you've put that brilliantly. I was speaking to the BFI recently about they have a pot of funding for development, but it's not geared to the kind of development costs that we have in animation. And I think it may be that we can look at reconfiguring the development pot that the BFI have so it's more relevant for animation. But I think the Young Audience Content Fund was absolutely the right type of fund and almost the right level of funding that we need for animation. So we're lobbying hard for a similar kind of fund that could be not just for development, but for production as well. That kind of approach specific to animation, I think, is needed. I think it's a hard time at the moment because there's just very little public funding around. There are serious issues that whichever government we have has to tackle, and we have to be realistic about what we can do in terms of public funding. But I think if we can use the funds that exist and make them more relevant to animation in terms of the level and what you can spend the money on, then that's a good starting point. So we're campaigning heavily on the need for development funding at the moment, but in a context where we know there are serious economic issues facing us all.
You mentioned, European collaboration, and back in September 2023, having not been able to really play sort of major roles as UK studios in the cartoon events like Cartoon Forum and Cartoon Movie, you and others managed to get a unique event, UK Animation Meets Europe, in Toulouse, and I think it showed that there's a real appetite from European studios and producers to work with the UK. And obviously in Europe, as you mentioned earlier, there's a raft of local tax incentives and there's co-production treaties that can be accessed. You know how to do it. So how would you advise someone looking to find and work with a European partner to proceed? Should they be going to events like Annecy? Even though we can't participate as lead producers in Cartoon Forum, should we be going anyway?
Yes, I think quickly, yes. I thought that the UK Meets the Europe event in Cartoon Forum last autumn was fabulous. I thought it gave us an opportunity to showcase who we are and what we do again. And I think that reignited a certain level of interest in the UK. It was really well received. And I think I really hope it makes the point that we should be going, even if we can't be majority producer, pitch level contributors, we can be part of the network and we can be part of pitching, where there's a co-production in view, and it's definitely worth it. I mean, to find out more about what the co-production opportunities are is really important, and there are opportunities to meet potential partners here in the UK. The CMC in Sheffield every year, the Manchester Animation Festival, or Move in Edinburgh. There's some really great opportunities, as well as the festivals, London, Cardiff, etc. There are opportunities to network and find out more about how you go about finding a co-production partner, what kind of things would be important. And then I think the Cartoon Next, Cartoon Movie, Cartoon Forum, Annecy, absolutely brilliant place to do all the networking and pitching, because there's no limitations there. And we spent a fair bit of time, as you know, Julian, building up a UK pavilion so that we have a presence and a physical place for people to meet at Annecy every year now, with the help from all sorts of partners, including Film London. There's MIP Junior, and then obviously there's the bigger scale and the more expensive opportunities. So you've got, Content Miami, increasingly with a focus on children's content, but Kids Green primarily as an opportunity to go out and network. But I'd say depending on where people are starting, go to some of the UK events, find out as much as possible, do your research, find out where there are the opportunities to meet people, because it isn't just about the most eye-catching tax relief, because, quite frankly, we've got that now as well ourselves, but it's about who you want to partner with, who you want to build a relationship with, who you share creative ideas with, and then build those relationships. And some of those opportunities exist in the calendar, and they aren't hugely expensive. They are quite expensive. I know that's a bit of a problem for people, but it's definitely worth getting out there and pressing the flesh and meeting people.
This podcast is made possible thanks to the support of the awesome Liberi Consulting. Liberi offers specially tailored industry-related training courses. Check them out at libericonsulting.com. That's LIBERI consulting.com. You can also find links to their fantastic courses on the Festivus website.
Now, it's interesting what you said about us being sort of, our tax incentives sort of being up there now, because I think one of the things that I've always thought was good about our system was how easy it is and how quick it is. There were for a time other incentives around the world which, as a headline percentage of what you could receive, looked sexier, but the reality is you could wait 2 years for your money. And here, if your timing is right and you've got a smart accountant and legal team, you can get your money in a couple of months. It's quite incredible how quickly it works. And obviously, you mentioned economic restrictions on the industry. There are other things, obviously, which are changing at the moment and affecting the animation sector. We've got audiences very clearly migrating from the traditional sort of linear platforms and even the newer streaming platforms off to YouTube and Roblox. There's some people perceive AI as a threat. Some people perceive AI as an opportunity. How do you see all these things affecting the industry and the individuals working within it?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a time of huge change. Maybe it's constant. Maybe the one thing in the industry is the constant change, but it feels like there are certain moments in time where, you're on the precipice of this huge change. And in terms of business and distribution and audience, I think that definitely what you've said is really important. The channels are massively opening up, and the usual linear channels are less important, or they're not not entirely unimportant, of course, but yeah, there's usually two schools of thought. And of course, you'll expect this, Julian, I veer towards the more optimistic. There are those that think that it's going to be market saturation. There's going to be too much competition in terms of the new and myriad number of digital platforms and so on, and difficulty in monetizing. I tend to think much more about, you've just got access to these wide audiences. You've got access to producing content in so many different forms, personalization, and economic and sort of creative freedom to do that. I think that there are all sorts of different business skills people need now to think about in terms of where the audience is, what they're looking for, how to reach them. And they need to, think way beyond the PSBs and the streamers even in terms of some of those opportunities. But I suppose the threats are, the competition and market saturation. The same is true of AI and automation generally. It's going to change things. And I don't think anyone truly knows how. We've had some really interesting talks at Animation UK about this. And I think broadly speaking, people feel as a tool, if you see this as a tool, it's going to make our lives a lot easier, more efficient, again, allow for personalization and the production of brands and how you think about your content as, a process of evolving audiences, developing brands and reaching new audiences is going to be perhaps where we need to go in terms of rethinking the way we go forward. Other people see it as a threat in terms of IP, developing IP and how people can protect that, which I do think is a genuine issue, something that a lot of people in the creative industries across the board are trying to think about at the moment, that this might diminish quality in the short term. But I think overall, I feel very optimistic because I think opening up audiences, diversifying audiences, but the need for basically studio leaders and production company leaders to think about how they adapt to this new world is really important. They might not be thinking now so much in the terms of, a one-off series kind of changing their lives, but that could be the platform for launching a whole new brand, a whole new set of characters, a whole new bite-sized approach to content development developed through different platforms. So the Series 2 option might not be so important. Anyway, there's lots of issues. I tend to think this is a really important time and a really positive time, but we've got to ride that wave. We've got to know how to get on it and ride it. And we've got to have all the parts of the ecosystem in place, the right people with the right skills and talent, the right vision, the right tax incentives, the right investment incentives. These are all ingredients in making sure that the UK is positioned in the best way to get the most out of this new development era.
Because one thing we can be certain is AI is not going away, is it?
Oh, it definitely is not. It definitely is not.
Okay, so just they're running out of time now to finish up. Your work continues to support the animation sector, and you influencing public and private bodies at a very high level. What advice would you give someone who's looking to change something? It doesn't have to be, a big thing like changing tax incentives, but anybody who's facing something and you change things all the time. What would you say to somebody who wants to change something?
Well, that's a good question. I always think, I would always prefer to be advising someone about how you create something, but then I wouldn't have the advice to give them. Advising someone about how to change something is just really, really doing your research, knowing who it is who will make that decision that you want in terms of affecting the change. And that means that's such an obvious thing to say, but you know what? Sometimes it's not the thing that people think about. They think about what needs to change or how it needs to change, not who it is they've got to convince to get this change to happen, and really understand them like you would, understand an opponent, your biggest competitor. Understand how they think, understand how they tick, even if they means the whole of the government or something. You've got to have a very strong case, and then you've got to be fearless and relentless and boring about not actually physically, literally boring, but boringly dogged about making that case at every opportunity you can. So that's it. I think about the audience or the recipient of the change, make the strongest case possible, keep it as short as possible, unlike my answer to this question. And keep going with it.
And what's the best piece of business advice that you have ever given somebody else?
Oh, geez. I'm going to say, because this has just come to my head now in respect of all the answers to this question, listen more, talk less. That's a kind of truism for life. Listen more, talk less. I think, seriously, in addition to that, I think, it sounds a bit fluffy and a bit soft, but I genuinely think this: always keep your ethics and your values close to what you're doing. I mean, that should permeate everything, your relationship with people, the way you cut deals, everything. Be ethical, be true, have your values close to you, close to your heart. And then, go with your gut, but take calculated risks. Don't just jump off the edge of a cliff at every opportunity. Go trust your instinct, but do that bit of research and take a calculated risk. Those are the things. Those are the truths. And I think I've received that advice. Probably not followed it, but that's the advice I've received.
Well, as I was saying, what advice would you have given yourself at the start of your career, and would you encourage anybody who's thinking of entering the animation sector? Would you encourage them to join?
What advice would I give to myself? It's quite long. Your career is quite long, and it's longer now, guys. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. You don't have to achieve everything quickly. You can take it easy. You've got time to do what you want to do and need to do. And sometimes things do take time. So if you're trying to do everything and you want to have achieved things by the age of 30, take that foot off the pedal. You can, you've got time. This is a long time. And then you can be clearer about what you want to do and how. That's what I would tell myself, actually, looking back. But I'd also, I think in the world of animation, I think we're at this point of it being a fascinating place to be within the TV and film industry. I think because animation is not just film and television, actually, but business, advertising, commercials, etc. There's all sorts of opportunities. Don't just think I'm going to go into animation to make a TV series or a film, although that is obviously what you might want to do. But there's all these other opportunities to apply my skills. So it's a really good broad industry. I should fling in a few stats here. It's an industry valued at 1.7 billion with 16,000 people working in it all across the UK, not just in London and South East, but hubs all across the UK. And, there is a real future. There are real opportunities over the long term. I think the industry looks very bright indeed. And I think it's an industry that works on relationships and partnerships. More than most other screen sectors, I see some real lifelong partnerships have emerged from people who've left university together or met in their early 20s and developed businesses together or created partnerships together. And I think that's fabulous. I look at those partnerships and I think, amazing, people have worked together. But choose your partner carefully. It's just as important to choose your business partner as carefully as you would your life partner. They will be with you for a long time, hopefully. And, that person that you work with or those people that you work with will be extremely important on how your life pans out. So there's a lot there, Julian. Off the top of my head, I'd say go for it. This is the best of the screen sectors, the most creative, the most business oriented, and the most lovely people you're going to find in film and TV, bar none.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate. And thank you for giving up your time to talk today and share your insights. Now, rumour has it that you may know the most exciting true crime story. Are you prepared to share that?
Oh my God, there's so many, right? I don't know where. That's such a difficult question. I don't know where you get that from. I could do a little podcast lecture series on that alone, because I don't know. But hey, I'll tell you what, I'll dive into something else. The true crime version of Baby Reindeer, right? I know this is an alternative true crime because it's not about murder, which it usually is in my humble experience. But that I just thought was phenomenal TV. And can I say another thing that won't make the cut?
Well, have you ever stopped?
I was travelling back from the UK yesterday to Ireland for a little pit stop in my happy place, and I was getting a very delayed Ryanair flight, and who did I see in the queue just there in front of me? Andrew Scott from Ripley, another fantastic non-animation loveliness offering from Netflix recently. There he was, sitting on the floor, waiting for his 3-hour delayed Ryanair flight, just like me. And I just think he's fabulous. That's just absolutely nothing to do with animation. Apart from I think someone should get him to do a voiceover for something soon. Amazing. That's all.
Well, I'm going to ring his agent right now.
Please do. Kate O'Connor said.
She saw your client sitting on the floor waiting for an eye, and she had this moment of inspiration.
She said, he's keeping it real. He's keeping it real. He should be working with the animation sector.
Brilliant. Thanks again. And anybody who wants to find out more about Animation UK, obviously go to the websites all there.
Yeah, go to animationuk.org. Might need to check that. I'm sure you will recheck that. And we will be very happy to talk to people about membership and everything we do. We don't represent individuals, we just represent studios. But look, we're at most of the places that you're going to be gathering anyway. And I hope to see a lot of you in Annecy. And the one thing I should have said, can you edit this in? Sorry. The one thing I should have said really clearly is one of the things that people absolutely have to do, sadly, I think for some people, is active networking. Yeah. It's part and parcel of the industry, and FSTVS provide a fantastic opportunity to do that. You don't need to be an aggressive extrovert to be a good networker, because animation industry is full of nice non-extroverts as well. So, but FSTVS offer that opportunity to provide that network, that essential networking piece of advice to get in and on in your career. So.
No, absolutely. I am oft there, the London ones, and they are brilliant. They're a lot of fun.
They are brilliant. I'm never there, but that's just my lack of stamina. But I will be there soon. And I'll see you soon, Julian.
Absolutely.
A huge thank you to Kate for her time and thoughts on where our animation industry might be heading. It's wonderful to hear such positivity from such an important and influential person in the creative industries. That was great fun. As always, a massive thanks to Julian and Scott for hosting. Information about Film London can be found at filmlondon.org/animation. Well worth a visit. And once again, a huge thank you to Liberi Consulting for all their support in making this podcast series a reality. Check out their industry-related training courses on the FSTVS website now. Thanks everyone, and come back soon for more episodes.